since you first started on your journey to discovering that you actually had Asperger's. And of all places, of course, you had to start that first step in
Doctor Who magazine,
which was almost the perfect place for you. Exactly how did it happen?
Well, it's April 2003, so I was 33, thereabouts. And the journalist who wrote this article, the article is called The Fan Gene. It's a 3-part series by a journalist called Gary Gillett. And he's looking at what makes fan behaviour, what makes fans act the way they do, why are they like they are. And in the second part, in this issue, he talks about a conversation he had with an actress at a Doctor Who convention. So she spent all day signing autographs and taking questions from the audience and all of that. And in the bar in the evening, he asked her what she thought was the cause of it all. You know, why do people band together like that and really indulge in their passion like that? And regarding Doctor Who fans, she said, everyone who comes to a convention is suffering from some degree of autism, aren't they? And that really took him back, you know. It's like, autism, you know?
So we're still in the very early stages of everyone thinking Rain Man and not having the acceptance and awareness we have today.
Yeah, so he was thinking someone who rocks back and forth, they talk in a monotone voice, they're reciting the telephone book, you know, that sort of thing. So he did some research on it. He looked up Hans Asperger and Leo Kanner. So Leo Kanner came up with the phrase autism, derived from the Greek word for self, so self-absorbed, I suppose. And Hans Asperger, who knew nothing of Kanner's work, was doing a similar study on children who were inclined to withdraw into their own world, had social interaction problems, problems making eye contact, you know, all of those things. But then his paper was buried for decades, and then a lady called Lorna Wing found it, and she's the person who coined the term Asperger's syndrome. And Gary quotes her here. She says that it includes the most able, highly intelligent person with social impairment in its subtlest form as his only disability. It overlaps with some learning disabilities, but shades right down into eccentric normality. So at the thin end of the wedge, there are people who are actually quite regular and ordinary, but they have all of those autistic traits in a subtle
And the phrase
expression.
eccentric or normality sums up probably a lot of people. Was it that
Well,
bit that leapt out for you?
He comments on it then. He says eccentric normality. Now there's a phrase that many a Doctor Who fan might use to describe themselves, and often cheerfully so. So they recognise it
in a
themselves.
positive way.
Perhaps there is something in that reading of fandom given by the actress after all, he says. Asperger's, like any syndrome, is recognised by a whole range of symptoms, not all of which need to be present in order to form a diagnosis. All the diagnostic criteria are subjective and cover everything from problems with social interaction, a limited ability to empathise with others, avoidance of eye contact, and certain speech impediments, right down to repetitive behaviour, collecting, list making, and immersion in fictional worlds with clearly defined rules and boundaries. And when I read that,
That was little alarm bells going off.
I thought, that is me all over. And of course, I'd had problems at school, you know, the transition to secondary school was the real start of it all, even though there were shades of it before then. But feeling like an alien, that I'd landed on this planet from somewhere else, didn't understand a lot of what was going on, didn't grasp things, the obsessive behaviour, and because of the obsessive behaviour, find it difficult to form friendships. Because A, I often didn't relate to the things that they liked, and B, they couldn't relate to me being so obsessed with Doctor Who and other
So
things.
this sort of spelt it all out for you,
Yeah.
and made you think, well, this sounds like me.
Yeah.
I've got to go and investigate. Where did you go next? What was your next step?
Well, I sort of brewed on this for a bit, you know, and then I was on the internet reading an interview with Gary Newman, the synthesizer legend and pioneer of the early 80s, and I was a Gary Newman fan. I loved all his sort of early albums set in the dystopian future type albums, and the stuff that came later on from his personal real life feelings, you know. And I identified with the music, with the lyrics, a great deal. And then he says in this interview that his wife thinks he's got Asperger's syndrome, and I've since learned that his wife's brother does have it and has been diagnosed with having it.
Right, so she was comparing Gary to what she'd seen her brother go through.
Yeah, and she said, you've got Asperger's. So then that explained, for Gary, that explained for him why he was very awkward when he granted interviews, when he was at the height of his fame, and he said all the wrong things. You know, they had a field day with it because he was so candid and brutally honest. They'd say, you know, where did you get the idea for that song from? Well, I stole it from such a body, you know.
And they don't want that sort of honesty.
They don't want to hear that, you know. So there'd be all sorts of things like that. That he dropped himself in it all the time, you know, and didn't know he was doing it.
So you'd heard that phrase again then, Asperger's syndrome.
So I thought, it's that thing again, you know. And then I don't know how many weeks after that, BBC Two ran a documentary called My Family and Autism, and it was about Jackie Jackson in Blackpool and her family, and I think she had 3 boys and 2 girls, and all the boys were on the autistic spectrum. And 14-year-old Luke Jackson actually presented the programme. He did all the 2-camera, you know, discussions. He did the voiceovers, did it all himself. And when I saw it advertised, I thought, I've got to have that recorded. So I recorded it, and then I played it back, and my wife said, it's like watching a 14-year-old you. He's talking about, he feels like an alien, he feels like he doesn't belong, you know. And my friend Anthony, when he watched it, he said, even down to the comments about football, because Luke had objected to being called obsessed when his peers at school talk about football incessantly and nobody says they're obsessed.
That's it, but his obsession, computers, was classed as something odd.
Yeah, and his mother got sick of him talking about computers all the time.
So you were starting to see all the same things as when you'd been the same age as him.
Well, with Gary Gillett's article as a starting point, and then the Gary Newman interview, and then the programme with Luke Jackson, by then I was sure that I'd got Asperger's, and all the stuff that confused me about the past and why I couldn't do certain things, and why I used to get so upset about not being able to go out socialising, because I used to think, well, it's easy.
Everyone else can do it, why can't I?
Why can't I do it? And I used to fantasise about how they'd say, do you want to come out with us here? And I'd say, yeah, and I think, oh, it's going to be all right, I'll do this and I'll do that. And then when I get there, freeze, feel really ill inside and end up going home. Or stay for the duration but not speak much and come away feeling like a failure, you know. And so to be wondering for all those years, why is that happening? Why is my mother shouting at me about Doctor Who? You know, and then this is the answer.
Yeah.
I've got it.
And then these other couple of links coming in with the television programmes and with the Gary Newman interview, suddenly all the pieces were falling into place.
Yes.
And so what did you do then?
Well, I got Luke Jackson's book, Freaks, Geeks and Asperger's Syndrome, and I got Dr. Tony Attwood's book. I think it was called Asperger's Syndrome, A Guide for Professionals and Parents or something like that. He's done another one since, The Complete Guide.
Which is considered to be perhaps the book, isn't it?
Bible of Asperger books.
And Dr. Attwood is obviously one of the leading authorities as well, isn't he?
He is. He's the world expert, world expert. So I read up on it, and those books were published by Jessica Kingsley Publishers. So I thought, I'm going to pitch my autobiography.
Because, of course, what you need to bear in mind is all this time you were still desperate to be an author. You'd always wanted, since a child, to be an author. So you'd always got these ideas in your head.
I'd had my Android novel, the first one, published by a small press publisher the year before. So I approached Jessica Kingsley and I submitted 3 sample chapters and a treatment, a synopsis of how it would develop for the other chapters, for the feelings unmutual. I sent it off and was obsessing about not having a diagnosis. I thought I can't say I've been diagnosed
because at this point you hadn't been.
Yeah, and it was November. I remember it being November 2003, and getting ready to go out somewhere. I can remember putting my tie on, in the bedroom, and I had the computer on, and the email came through from Jessica Kingsley while I was doing that, and I'd sent her Android as well, because they did a children's range of books for children with Asperger's syndrome, and I'd written in the original edition of Android to Jessica an unofficial Asperger adventure, because I'd realised that an Android schoolgirl, is like a child with Asperger's syndrome. So I thought I'll send her that too.
And you'd written that, of course, without really thinking about Asperger's at all, hadn't you?
I didn't know anything about it when I wrote that. And I got this email back saying we weren't going to do any more autobiographies, but because of the way you've done it, all those little sort of asides where it goes off into what I'm thinking, which people pick up on in a scene, they really like that. And the references to Doctor Who and the Incredible Hulk and all of that was a new angle to hook it all on. So she said, we're going to commission The Feelings Unmutual, and we've looked at Android as well, and it's very aspy. That's an affectionate phrase for Asperger's. You're an aspie if you've got Asperger's. It's very aspy, she said, and we'll take that as well.
Excellent.
So I had two books suddenly coming out, and they came out the following September.